Welcome to the program. You're with Arise News in Nigeria's capital, Abuja, as we bring you special cross-country coverage of the 2023 Governorship and State Assembly elections. And it's been a weekend of high political drama with the second round of voting for governors and state assemblies, an election that some see as another rebuke to the will of the Nigerian people.
Indeed, lots of upsets, intrigues and close calls in the ballot, in which predictably the ruling APC has come up trumps. The main opposition PDP has also limbered up, and the NNPP has picked up the big prize of Kano State in northwest Nigeria. But what about the process? How free, fair and credible was it? Well, over the next 2 hours, we'll be live with our correspondents across Nigeria, as well as a top crop of analysts and commentators.
So the voting for governors and state assemblies has taken place, but while the winners are savouring the prospect of wielding tremendous influence, the losers are preparing to go to court in protest at some of the results. The voting process saw many reported incidents of violence, voting irregularities and fraud, and at least some of the winners, not to mention the Electoral Commission INEC, will likely face a crisis of legitimacy going forward, in addition to confronting the big issues of poverty, unemployment, insecurity, and a cost of living emergency.
That's right. So an election that was supposed to further entrench democracy, but the jury is still out on whether it has ended up eroding it and placing the country in a much more politically precarious situation. For the APC, there have been big wins across Nigeria, with the results so far delivering victories for the party in Lagos, Ogun, Gombe, Yobe, Kwara, Jigawa, Sokoto, Katsina, and Cross River states. They are also leading in a couple of other states where the results are still coming in.
Some gains also for the PDP in Akwa Ibom, Oyo and Delta. Lots of tension throughout the day. In Delta State, for instance, with a serious threat of the INEC Collation Center being charged by thugs as the results were being announced. The police had to fire tear gas to repel the threat of that invasion. Also, INEC saying that some of their staff had been taken hostage in Ughelli North, allegedly by the Deputy Senate President Ovie Omo Agege, something that his team denied. So a lot of issues there. But then at about 3 p.m. Nigerian time this afternoon came the official announcement of a victory for the PDP's Sheriff Oborevwori.
Labour Party 48047. ACME, good news, good man. NNPP 791. America Emmanuel, NRM 612. Oborevwori Sheriff Francis Orewedo, PDP 360234. Edijala Emmanuel, PRP 521. Obagi Kenneth Omemewa, SDP 4639. Ofeye Sonny, YPP 484. Oko Emmanuel, ZLP 303. Das Oborevwori Sheriff Francis Orewedo of the PDP, having satisfied the requirements of the law, is hereby declared the winner and is returned elected. Signed 18th March 2023. Thank you. Party agents, please, can you come on?
Well, international observer teams have started releasing their preliminary statements about the conduct of the governorship and state assembly elections. And for more on this, we're joined now in the studio by the chief observer of the European Union's election observation mission, Barry Andrews. Thank you very much indeed for coming in and for your patience there. So 3 weeks after a contentious presidential election, how do you see the governorship ballot? A marginally better election or even deeper contention?
Well, first, thanks for having me in the studio, and I'd like to thank the Nigerian people for the great welcome that they've given us throughout our mission. We've been here since early January, and our long-term observers will complete their work later this week. So they're still in collation centres as we speak, and our core team will stay until the end of April, or till the middle of April. So our preliminary statement concluded that there had been a lot of obstruction of the will of the people in the governorship and state assembly elections that took place on Saturday. Nevertheless, we also were able to record on a more positive note that civil society organizations have really been working hard to try to defend democratic standards here in Nigeria, and I think some credit is due there. I think the two things that I take away particularly is on the security front, it was extremely negative on Saturday, and it clearly discouraged some people from exercising their democratic right to make a choice, disenfranchise them. But also on the transparency side, there was some improvements in the performance of the election day process, the opening of the ballots, the polling units were on time for most of the time, and also the uploading of results onto the results viewing platform was done in real time as had been promised. So it was a mixed bag, but the overall voter participation on Saturday was extremely low, and unfortunately doesn't tell a very happy tale.
Indeed, when you said there were some improvement in transparency of the process, from your observation, where are the areas that were lagging? Where could those other improvements could have happened?
Yeah, well, I think most of the problems occurred during the presidential election, where polling units opened very late, where distribution of sensitive election material took place in a fairly haphazard way, where the uploading of results onto iRev were very tardy, and as late as 10 p.m. on that day there were still no results uploaded. And as we all were led to believe, this would be a great game changer where real-time information would be available, and that wasn't the case. And then there were major problems in collation centres. In some cases, collation centres weren't open. And to go back a little bit to BVAS, sometimes they weren't operated properly by polling officers. So they were the main issues around transparency. And clearly, because that didn't operate very well on the 25th of February, it discouraged a lot of people from voting, because they came to the conclusion that their vote didn't matter. And that's a really bad situation to be in, because already you have a low voter participation, now compounded by a lack of faith in the integrity of the overall process. So we tried to draw attention to that in the preliminary statement which we made this afternoon.
Right, so your sense then is that there were lots of small fire outbreaks, if you like, in this governorship election that had to be put out one by one, and you think the authorities managed to keep a handle on it and it didn't become an inferno. But you've said that your group's mission in Nigeria is to strengthen democracy. Do you think the election met the standard for strengthening democracy based on criteria that are internationally acceptable?
Well, first of all, to draw that conclusion, it would require us to compare it to previous elections. And that's not something we do. So this is a fresh mandate, where this mission looks at this election and this election alone. And at the end of our process, which is coming in June, we'll publish a final report which will contain conclusions and recommendations. And it's in that report that you will find the type of conclusions I think that you're referring to. But it is impossible to ignore the deficits that have occurred during the course of this overall general election, including the presidential. And it is difficult as well to point to progress being made in terms of the democratic story of Nigeria. So it's premature for us to draw those conclusions. Today's preliminary statement is based on what we observed so far, and as I said, our long-term observers are still at collation centres today, and the process is ongoing. But unfortunately, quite a lot of negatives on this occasion.
I hate to preempt your final reports, which you're keeping close to your chest and don't want to talk about it. You seem to be talking on your preliminary report, which you've released so far. But I wanted to ask you, looking at what has happened in the sub-region in recent times with the rise in coups and how important democracy is for a country like Nigeria, how much of a damage do you think this has cost to the democratic fabric of the country? You're talking about high voter apathy. You also talked about high violence against voters in the country, and you say, this would discourage the people. How bad is this? And do you think Nigeria can redeem itself? When I say Nigeria now, I mean the political class. I mean the electoral body that conducts the elections. Do you think it's redeemable?
Well, absolutely, it's redeemable. There's no question of doubt about that. And one of the things that I'd like to say is that I am really amazed by the resilience of Nigerian people who queued up for hours in difficult conditions, conditions of insecurity, to exercise their democratic right to choose the government that they wished to have. So I have no doubt that the desire and appetite for democracy will not be in any way reduced. But unfortunately, a lot of people concluded that it wasn't worth their while to go to the polling stations. And that's a very negative thing. And this isn't just a problem of Nigeria or of Africa. Unfortunately, across the globe, we're seeing what's called democratic backsliding. And if you want to look at this at a global level, Freedom House in the UK recorded we've had 17 consecutive years of downgrading of democracy across the world. So it matters because democracies tend to degrade slowly. And you have to really call it out when it happens. And as you quite rightly say, everybody said before this election, it really matters not just to Nigerians, but to the region and to the continent as a whole. So when it doesn't go right, then it's even more important to call it out. And I really hope that if we do make any criticisms, that they're taken in the spirit in which they were given, which is about constructive criticism. And we certainly won't turn our back on the process or the democracy. And we've been at 7 elections in a row since the return of democracy in 1999, and delighted and honoured to be invited here again.
Well, let me just take you back again to the criteria that you use as a test against this election. I mean, you've talked about things like inclusivity, whether everyone can come and cast their ballots. I mean, you mentioned as much not long ago. Transparency, how the votes are gathered, collated and tabulated, and on credibility. I mean, those are the tests against which you measure the election. In that context, what were your observations?
Well, as I say, the process is ongoing. I don't want to frustrate you. You're obviously interested to see where we're going to land ultimately on these issues. But I think it's very clear that there are deficits in terms of inclusivity. For example, 10% of candidates in the State Assembly and governorship elections were women. And these are not just international standards. These are standards that Nigeria has set for itself to try to improve the representation of half the population. And if half the population are almost completely disenfranchised in this way in terms of political participation, then that falls below any standards that Nigeria has set for itself in international conventions that it has signed up to. So, that's a particular point which can easily be drawn out. In terms of transparency, it's not just INEC, and it would be unfortunate if there was a conclusion that if we somehow fixed INEC or did some reforms, that would lead to a silver bullet of some sort. I think the political parties have a major role to play to make sure that we achieve transparency. And we were able to identify problems in relation to vote buying, where our long-term observers noticed that. We were able to identify problems in relation to abuse of incumbency, where those who are non-government participants in the election were unable to attend rallies, and they were where incumbents used the office to promote their candidacy, which again falls below the standards that Nigerians have set for themselves.
Okay, stay with us. We do have some breaking news. Well, the All Progressives Congress APC, Reverend Father Hyacinth Elia, has been declared winner of the Benue State governorship election after scoring the highest votes to beat his closest rival, the People's Democratic Party's candidate, Titus Uba. Elia led in the race with a margin of 251,020 votes. Returning officer for the governorship election in Benue, Professor Adamu Farouk Kuta, who is the Vice Chancellor of the Federal University of Technology, Mina, announced that Elia polled a total of 473,933 votes to lead Uba, who had 223,913 votes, while Labour Party's Herman Hembe trailed behind them with a total of 41,881 votes. Again, breaking news, Benue State has gone to the All Progressives Congress.
Well, in a moment, we're hoping to be crossing over live to Port Harcourt to speak to Arise correspondent Andy Omano, but we've still got the Chief Observer of the European Union's Election Observation Mission here, Barry Andrews. Thank you very much indeed for staying with us. I was going to ask you, those places that those areas that you identified problems, for example, with the political parties and so on. I mean, we've heard the Americans, I think the British and so on, saying that there would be sanctions against people who are found to have violated the election rules, guidelines and propriety. I mean, could you speak a little bit to that? Is that something that you would be recommending?
Well, I'm glad to say that's way beyond my pay grade to talk about sanctions. Our mission is very dedicated to the process itself. And the question of sanctions is a matter for the European Council.
Yeah, but they base a lot of their conclusions on your report.
They may well do so, yeah. But we certainly wouldn't be making any recommendations of that nature. Anything like that would be seen as political interference. And we are here to make an assessment based on the evidence that we collate, based on the observations that we make, and then we make a final report. We would never get into this person should resign, that person should have sanctions, those kind of conclusions. We'd never get into it. And because we follow this non-political, non-interference methodology, I think we enjoy the trust then of the authorities. And when we make a report, it's accepted as robust, honest, and well-intended. And so we tend to avoid any of those types of conclusions when we make our recommendation at the end.
Indeed. And I just wanted to ask you, based on your observation and your assessment, this you said was widespread when you talk about vote buying and voter intimidation or harassment. Those were widespread, according to your observation. Correct me if I'm wrong. But I also wanted to know how widespread they were across the country or across where you monitored. How prominent was it? Would you say some places witnessed more than others? And also, based on your observation, I don't want to preempt your final report, but if Nigeria needs to prioritize some of the things that need to be done before the next cycle of election in 4 years, what should be top on the list?
Well, first of all, we have a limited number of observers in the field, just less than 70 across 20 states. Okay. So naturally, this isn't exactly an X-ray of everything that's happening in Nigeria. Nevertheless, among those 70, we were able to report on 5 examples of vote buying taking place, which is quite a high sample when you consider how few observers we had in the field. And we were able to cross-check that with citizen observers from Nigerian CSOs like YAGA and CODE and others who had observers in the field. And overall, that gave us the confidence to conclude that there was widespread vote buying, and it wasn't just cash, there was also distribution in kind benefits to voters, and unfortunately that clearly undermines the integrity of the process. And this is a matter that needs to be dealt with by the legal authorities. It's not our job to make any conclusions about whether anybody has committed a crime of vote buying. It's up to the authorities to investigate and to prosecute where appropriate, where there is evidence that this has taken place. And we did see some of that with EFCC during the course of Saturday. And there just needs to be more of it so that it is a sufficient deterrent for those who would carry out this kind of crime.
Right. I know you've got to run in a minute. We've got about a minute or so, a minute and a half left on the chat. And thank you very much indeed for giving us the time. But can you just summarize for us so far what your supplementary report says about this election, just to keep our audiences across it?
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think the first thing to say is that the security situation led to a very negative effect on voter participation. That was one of the key headline findings of our observations on this occasion. But we are very, very anxious to underline that this is part of an ongoing process, and our collation is still going on as we speak. Secondly, we did identify improvements in the overall use of the technology and the process on the day, opening of etc. And we were able to also acknowledge a lot of the work that civil society does here to uphold the democratic standards is really positive. And the final thing I would like to say is really to just re-emphasize how clear it is to me that Nigeria wants a high-functioning democracy. And that hope, that aspiration matters not just to Nigerians but to the region. And that's why the European Union has invested so much time and expertise. We have a great core team of experts here since early January. That's why we invest so much time and expertise, because it matters to Nigerians, it matters to the region, and it matters to the relationship that we have with Nigeria for the future.
Thank you very much indeed. Barry Andrews is the Chief Observer of the European Union's Election Observation Mission. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, let's cross lines now to Port Harcourt, where Arise correspondent Andy Omano is at the Collation Centre to give us an update from there. Hello, Andy. What's going on? I see lots of empty chairs behind you.
Yes, Adesowa, thank you so much. Yes, empty chairs because the session is being put on hold till 7 o'clock, I should say. Initially, we were asked to soft pedal till around 5 o'clock, but about 30 minutes ago, we got another announcement that the authorities have said this commencement would be at 7 o'clock. We have just a local government to go. That's Ahoda West local government area. All 22 local government areas in Rivers State, results have been announced, and that is where we are for now at Adesowa.
Got distracted a bit. There's quite a bit of interesting stuff going on here, but I expect it's much more interesting where you are, and we might have missed some of what you said, although I expect the audience got the gist of most of it. But when are you expecting things to resume down there? And I apologize if I'm making you repeat yourself.
Okay, we're expecting the resumption to be at 7 o'clock. That is less than an hour's time, Charles. And everybody here is waiting with bated breath because this journey started since yesterday, and here we are. We're still expecting that probably before the next couple of hours or so, this exercise will be tidied up, and the Rivers people would know who is going to be their governor-elect. Charles.
Okay. Well, I mean, we've seen a lot of drama out of Rivers State. We've seen a considerable amount of chaos also down there. What is your overall sense of how things have gone up to this point?
Well, I think that's the best way to capture it. It's been drama. Of course, if you are very conversant with politics in Rivers State, you would discover that this is not something out of the ordinary. It has been like this since 1999, where this democratic journey started. Oftentimes, when states that are considered to be flashpoints are mentioned, Rivers State comes tops because of the brand of politics that is often played here. And I think that is what is going on. On Saturday, when the elections held, there was a lot of chaos across local government areas, ballot boxes snatching, and if you like it, about 5, though did not be confirmed, about 5 lives were said to have been lost in the exercise. So it is not something out of the ordinary, I should say, Charles. Is the brand of politics here, but what everyone seems to be saying is, can we change? Does that mean that there hasn't been any change of attitude between 1999 and today? This is 2 decades and still counting. Should we continue to play politics this way? That's the question almost everyone who is conversant with the politics in Rivers State is asking. But of course, here we are, the drama is still on, and we are hoping that this will come to an end today because, like I said earlier on, so many Rivers people are on the edge waiting to see who is going to be declared their governor-elect come later today.
Indeed, Andy, a very important question begging for answer there. What kind of politics do we play, especially in Rivers State? But tell me, Andy, about the journalists, covering this, journalists such as yourself. You've had long nights, long days covering this election, especially in Rivers State. What's been the response from journalists? What has been your experience? I recall the last election cycle, journalists were brutalized, they were kidnapped, they were arrested in Rivers State. The military was said to have come in. Tell us, has there been any much of a difference when it comes to reporting elections in Rivers State?
Well, there's no much difference at this one. Like we would always tell ourselves, what drives you as a journalist, as a broadcast journalist in this context is the passion to be able to do the job. Because if you don't have passion, you really cannot run with the job of journalism. And I think that is what has continued to goad us on. It's been stressful, it's been a lot of long hours and long nights. But who do you cry to? You need to dispense with the job, because the viewers in terms of television and the listeners and radio are waiting to know what will happen and who should report it. It is we, the journalists. So we have nowhere to run through. We just must do the job and do it excellently well, professionally. At this one.
And Andy, these attacks and disruptions and alleged manipulations are obviously, by any standard, terrible, egregious crimes against the rights of the people and against the democracy of this country. And for those who become the victims, you talked about people getting killed and so on. I mean, this is hugely traumatic, and it must be so disruptive to relations between different groups living in Rivers State, for instance.
Absolutely, Charles. But of course, this is where we have seen ourselves, as it were, and what journalists and every other who are concerned about the goings on politically in Rivers State are asking for is, at the end of it all, can those who are alleged to have perpetrated these crimes be brought to book, because to serve as a deterrent? Because if that does not happen, it will mean that people would want to tread this route, and it's not the best that it should be at all.
Well, Andy, we're counting down to 7 p.m. local time when you say this coalition is expected to resume. What should we expect, really? 7 local governments to go. Do you have an idea if the 7 local governments are on ground, or will there be further postponement? Do you have any idea at all?
There are not 7 local government areas at this one, just 1 local government outstanding. Rivers State has 23 local government areas. 22 have been done and dusted. We're waiting for the result from just 1 local government, and that is Ahoda West local government area in Rivers State. We're hoping that by 7 o'clock, what needed to be done will be tidied, so that for those of us who have had long days and long nights can go rest our heads, and also for the Rivers people to know who is their governor-elect.
Well,
right, okay. Andy, thank you very much indeed. And you probably got about 20 minutes to rest your head before we come calling again. So seize the moment, my friend. And thank you very much indeed for your sterling coverage there from Port Harcourt. And Andy Omano is Arise correspondent in Rivers State. Well, let's bring back that latest story. The All Progressives Congress, APC's Reverend Father Hyacinth Alia has been declared winner of the Benue State governorship election after scoring the highest votes to beat his closest rival, the People's Democratic Party's candidate, engineer Titus Uba. Alia led in the race with a margin of 251,020 votes. Returning officer for the governorship election in Benue State, Professor Adamu Farouk Kuta, who is Vice Chancellor of the Federal University of Technology in Mina in Niger State, announced that Alia polled a total of 473,933 to lead Uba, who had 223,000 1,913, while the Labour Party's Hemen Hembe trailed behind them with a total of 41,881 votes.